Pete's remark. The young rabbit hopped quickly towards him and asked,
"What happened after you got in?"
"You don't want to know," Papa Pete said, shaking his head remorsefully.
"Oh yes, I do want to know,"
the young rabbit exclaimed. "Okay, if you must know," said Papa Pete, "you better come over here and sit down, so I can tell you what happened." The young rabbit, without any hesitation, hopped to the tree where Papa Pete had settled down to tell the young rabbit about his encounter with Mr. McGregor. "My name is Peter Rabbit. My young friends, such as you, call me Papa Pete." Papa Pete then stuck his paw out to shake the young girl rabbit's paw.
"My name is Cheryl Lop, and my friends call me Cheryl."
"Well, Cheryl, how do you do?" said Papa Pete. After the two rabbits introduced themselves, Papa Pete began to tell his encounter with Mr. McGregor. Cheryl listened attentively to every word of Papa Pete's story as he exaggerated every detail. At the end of the story, Cheryl agreed that trying to get some vegetables from Mr. McGregor's garden was not worth her life. Papa Pete ended by saying, "I can show you where you can get all the vegetables you want to eat without ever being caught." Cheryl's eyes lit up with excitement.
"Where is that?"
she asked. "It is the blue and white house just before you get to the Willow Tree Meadow Park entrance."
"You mean that big mansion?"
Papa Pete laughed softly and continued, "I'm not sure I would call it a mansion, but I believe that's the place." Cheryl looked at Papa Pete and said, puzzled,
"Are you serious? The people who live there are just going to give me all the vegetables I want?"
"Why not?" replied Papa Pete. "Are we not friends?"
"So you live there?"
she asked. "Yes, I do," said Papa Pete. Cheryl's big brown eyes filled with tears as she continued,
"No one has ever given my family or me anything. Ever since we moved here to Willow Tree Meadow, my dad and mom have had a hard time feeding all of us. I have 6 brothers and 3 sisters, not including me. We are a pretty big family."
"I don't think you are as big as the Fisher Frog family," replied Papa Pete. "They must have had over 1,000 frogs at their last family reunion."
"Wow, that is a big family,"
said Cheryl a little more cheerfully.
"I would hate to have to feed them."
Papa Pete laughed and then reached out to pat Cheryl on her head. Papa Pete continued by saying, "You won't have to worry about your family not having enough to eat. Whenever you want some vegetables, just go and knock on the door and ask for me or my wife, Mama Clarita. She will be happy to let you get some vegetables. We have a huge garden in the back of my house full of vegetables. You can have as much as you want." Cheryl opened her arms and hugged Papa Pete as tightly as she could. While hugging her back, Papa Pete said, "Now let's go and get some vegetables for you to bring home." Papa Pete and Cheryl hopped past Mr. McGregor's fence and headed towards Papa Pete's house. When they arrived at Papa Pete's house, Papa Pete opened his gated fence and then hopped towards an open shed door. Inside the shed, he took out 2 large sacks and threw them over his shoulder. "Let's go that way," he pointed. Behind the big house was a large garden filled with every type of vegetable you could imagine. Cheryl was amazed at the variety of vegetables that Papa Pete had growing. Looking at Cheryl's excited face, Papa Pete asked, "What do you think your mom might want you to bring home to eat?" Cheryl was too much in awe to answer Papa Pete. She just stood looking at the huge garden. "I will start picking some lettuce," interjected Papa Pete. "Why don't you get some of those peas and carrots over there?" Papa Pete then pointed to a row of peas and carrots. He handed Cheryl one of the sacks, and then he hopped to the rows of lettuce and began placing the leaves inside his sack. Cheryl hopped quickly to the rows of peas and began placing them in her sack. The two worked quickly, and soon both of their bags were full of vegetables. Rushing to finish, Cheryl forgot to tie the sack closed. When she threw it over her shoulder, all the vegetables toppled to the ground.
"Oh no!"
she cried out in disgust.
"Look what I've done!"
Papa Pete hopped over to where Cheryl sat crying. "Well, what you just did reminded me of a great story told to me by my friend James Fisher," said Papa Pete. Cheryl looked up at him with wet eyes and replied,
"What story?"
Papa Pete placed his bag on the ground and sat next to her. He began telling the story. "I have a good friend named James Fisher. We both love swapping stories about things that happen in the community. James always had great stories to tell about the events that happened around Fisher Lake. So, one day, after my morning cup of tea, I decided to go to James's house. I found James sitting on a small rock by the bank of the lake. That day, James decided to tell me the story about a woman called the Washerwoman." The Washerwoman's story. There was once a young woman whose job was washing clothes for people in town. Every morning, before the sun rose, she would wake up